Good morning, everybody. My name is Scott Anderson. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I'll be moderating this session entitled Mindfulness for Boosting Resilience and Lowering Stress. Thank you for attending the inaugural Mental Health and Wellbeing Summit, offering workshops and activities for students to take a break and take care of their mental and physical health. Before we continue, I invite us to take a moment to reflect on the land in which we currently reside. If you are in Madison, we are guests on the ancestral home of the Ho-Chunk Nation. The University of Wisconsin-Madison occupies Ho-Chunk land, a place their nation has called Dejop since time immemorial. In an 1832 treaty, the Ho-Chunk were forced to cede this territory. Decades of ethnic cleansing followed when both the federal and state government repeatedly but unsuccessfully sought to forcibly remove the Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin. This history of colonization informs our shared future of collaboration and innovation. Today, UW-Madison respects the inherent sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk Nation, along with the 11 other First Nations of Wisconsin. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. And please join us in uncovering such truths every day. I want to thank the Professional Interpreting Enterprise, PIE, for providing interpretation and captioning, and the Wisconsin Union Campus Event Service for producing this event. The closed captioning button will appear in the toolbar at the bottom of the Zoom screen. Q&A will be open and should be used to post any questions. I will monitor the questions that are posted. Thank you. Introducing Professor Dunn. Dr. Dunn works at the intersection of cognitive science and contemplative practice. He's a masterful translator of meditation texts and a long-time meditation practitioner. John is the Distinguished Chair of Contemplative Humanities, core faculty at the Center for Healthy Minds, and chair of the Asian Languages and Cultures Department. Please join me in a warm welcome for Professor Dunn.
Thank you very much, Scott. It's really great to be here on this day where I can look out my window here. I'm here at my home, as many of us, working from home during the pandemic. But it's certain things are starting to look pretty bright, aren't they? I can look out my window and see a whole bed of crocuses poking up. No more snow actually on the ground here in our yard. A bit of sunshine, spring is on the way, some good signs in terms of the pandemic itself. So things are looking up, and it's really wonderful to take this pause now, I think, on this day. Great idea to create a mental health summit for us just to take a pause and to, in a sense, give ourselves an opportunity to enjoy what we can enjoy, but also to work through whatever challenges we may be facing. And of course, we all face challenges at various times, but part of what it means to be human is that actually we are amazingly resilient. We have amazing capacities, innate capacities, every human has them, that has enabled us not just to survive, to evolve, but actually to flourish. And one of those capacities is a capacity that we call mindfulness. Now, this is a term that originally enters into our vocabulary from Buddhist practices that trace back to almost 2,000 years, or maybe even more. But these days, actually, what we speak of as mindfulness really is something that's been secularized, taken out of the Buddhist context, combined with practices from other traditions, actually, other contemplative traditions, including influences from Christianity, Islam, and Hinduism, for example. So mindfulness, as we speak of it now, is really a kind of new practice in some ways, a modern practice that has been used in many different contexts. We find it used in clinical contexts to help with depression, anxiety. We also find it used in the context of enhancing performance in sport, for example. And our own UW Athletics department has been engaging with practices around mindfulness and other kinds of practices that we can more broadly call awareness practices. So what we're going to do today is actually do some of these practices. We're going to have an opportunity together to practice a little bit of mindfulness and also to learn about how mindfulness can help us to deal with our stress, to transform some of that stress, maybe even into positive energy, and to see how it helps with resilience. So let's begin with a really simple kind of practice. This style of practice can be done really at any time. Sometimes we talk about the difference between an active practice. You can do mindfulness. And when we say practice, by the way, I should point out that, it's an innate capacity. But as with many human innate capacities, you can actually cultivate it. You can develop it. It's a skill that you can learn and get better at. Now, I think many of my colleagues in the sciences would argue that actually this is a capacity we all have. I would certainly agree with that too. But it's a capacity that we can enhance through practice. And there are kinds of practices that are you might say more formal, that are done in a seated meditation posture. And there are other ways of practicing that involve where you can cultivate mindfulness when you're, commuting on the bus or you're just taking a walk. So mindfulness is something you can do in any context, but we're going to do something that's more focused on seated meditation. And you can sit in really any way you like. It doesn't have to be too special, but there are a couple of features that are useful when you sit. So one of them is that if you're going to sit actually in a chair, you can also sit on a cushion on the floor. But what's important is that you have a sense of stability. So it can be useful to have your feet flat on the floor. And then the other really useful feature of your posture is a posture that is at the same time both relaxed and alert. And you can induce that kind of posture. You can find that kind of posture sometimes just by sort of elongating your spine a bit, almost feeling like there's a string out the top of your head. You sort of pull it up and then let it settle down. Just let the vertebrae settle one on top of the other. And then if you like, perhaps your hands can be on your lap. They could be on your thighs. A posture some people use is to put your hands like this and then settle them down onto your lap. Either way, whatever works for you. Just finding that sense of relaxation and alertness together. Now, you can choose to have your eyes open, but you might want to direct your gaze downward a bit. Or if you like, you can close your eyes. And I invite you first just to take in a deep breath and let it out through the mouth. And perhaps another one. And out. And now I'd just like you to direct your attention to the sensations of breathing. Very simple. Simply notice the breath. You can notice it anywhere you like, but you might find it easiest to do so at the abdomen. Just gently attending to the sensations of breathing for a couple of minutes here. All right, let's gently return now to our conversation. If your eyes have been closed, you may open them. We're going to be doing a bit of meditation throughout this session, but I wanted to just start with a short little bit like this in order to demonstrate something. Some of you may be already quite experienced, and this kind of practice of mindfulness, cultivation of mindfulness, learning how to flex your mindfulness muscle, as it were. And for some of you, this may be very new. But even if you're an experienced meditator, someone who's done this before, probably even just in that short amount of time, not even 2 minutes, something happened, which is you got distracted. You probably lost track of your breath for a moment, or at least maybe thought about something else, or you noticed a sound or what have you. And this is what is supposed to happen in a sense, right? We're not watching our breath because the breath that somehow magically is going to, make us healthier in itself. We're just using some kind of a neutral object to allow the mind to settle, the attention to settle on that object. And then what we really, in a sense, want to have happen is for a distraction to arise. Because a big part of what mindfulness is about is not stopping our thoughts or stopping our distractions, but developing a different relationship with our distractions, a different relationship with our thoughts. And one aspect of this actually really, in some sense, is all about resilience in a certain way. So there's an old story that can help us to understand this. An old story way back, probably told almost 2,500 years ago in its first version. It goes something like this: a fellow's walking through the forest and, maybe not paying attention to where he's going, and gets in a place where people are hunting, and he gets shot with an arrow. Now, an ordinary person to whom this happens suddenly feels the pain of the arrow, right? And then what that person probably does is starts to say, why did I get shot with the arrow? Who did this? What a terrible thing to happen to me. Why am I the one that had to get shot with an arrow? As opposed to the sage, the wise person, who, when they are shot with an arrow, of course, they need to deal with it. They need to deal with the pain. They need to get attention, but they don't heap the suffering on top of the pain, as my friend John Kabat-Zinn would say. So this is what we call the second arrow. So the first arrow is getting shot. The second arrow is catastrophizing that, turning it into a story about how terrible things are. And we can do that in a big way, or we can do that in a very small way. And interestingly, even in this just moment of a little bit of mindfulness meditation, you might even have done a tiny bit of catastrophizing yourself, a little bit of a second arrow, maybe not a second arrow, maybe just a little second dart, could have come by in the form of, oh, I'm supposed to be watching my breath, but now I'm distracted. I don't know how to do this. I'm not doing this right. So that is a little bit of a second arrow, actually. And part of the opportunity, one feature of mindfulness that's very helpful for resilience is to not shoot that second arrow. And when we shoot that second arrow, part of what happens is that it actually keeps us stuck in whatever negative situation we're in. And when we speak about resilience, one way of thinking about resilience is actually, it's just our capacity to recover from a challenge. And that to recover to something like you might call a baseline. So if you can imagine a graph, we have a challenge, and then we have some kind of a response. That response might be about our amygdala, how strongly our amygdala responds to some kind of a challenge. It might be about our immune system or an inflammatory response. It could be about some kind of a behavioral response. But whatever that response is, the idea is that we can see that we respond to a challenge by some kind of intensity. And then after that challenge is over, we can recover, kind of return to baseline. So this is the basic idea of resilience. And when we're challenged, of course, we need to have a response. We don't want to just remain inert. But if we hold on to the challenge, in a sense, if we hold on to the negativity of the challenge, if we say to ourselves, well, why am I going through this? What we find is actually it takes a lot longer, much longer for us to recover. As opposed to coming right down to baseline, it takes much longer for us to recover from that challenge. So one way in which mindfulness can be very helpful for cultivating resilience is just recognizing our habits of shooting that second arrow. And what's the antidote, so to speak, in mindfulness for dealing with that second arrow is just a certain kind of acceptance. So for example, just very straightforwardly, when we do our meditation, we become distracted. What we could do is we can be very reactive. We can, again, sort of shoot that second arrow and say, oh, geez, I lost my breath again. I can't keep track of this. Whatever kind of object of meditation I'm supposed to be focusing on, I'm just so terrible at this. So that whole story, of course, is just keeping the distraction going on the one hand, but it's also creating kind of negative response in our experience. So in lieu of that, we can, and of course, one thing that's really interesting that I've certainly experienced and many meditators have experienced is you lose track of your breath or whatever object you're meditating on. Then you tell yourself this story like, oh gosh, I can't do this right. What have I done? And then you say, oh, I'm not supposed to react that way. And then you catastrophize the catastrophizing. So you shoot a third and a fourth, and yes, a lot of arrows. So how do we let go of all of that? One simple way is we just notice what's happening and accept it. Just notice, accept it, and then go back to the breath. Simply notice the distraction, accept that this distraction is happening. No need to judge it. So this is, in this style of mindfulness, we speak of being non-judgmental. And that attitude of being non-judgmental doesn't mean we don't want to see what's happening. We're not closing off our mind to the fact of the distraction. We're just not going to kind of make a big deal out of it. We're simply going to notice it, accept that that's happening, and return. So let's try that just for a short little while here, maybe a minute or so. So once again, finding your position. So this is a more formal practice, but you can do this, even taking a walk, riding on the bus, even you can do something like this. So it's always something that you can settle the mind on as an object of your practice. So let's try that now here, sitting, finding that position. There's no need to breathe any particular way. Wherever the breath is fine. No need to control it. No need to be concerned about it. The body will breathe on its own. Simply let the attention settle on the breath. As distractions arise, just notice, accept, let go, and return the attention to the breath. All right, let's again come back into our conversation. I want to invite you now to consider, was that a little different maybe? A bit of acceptance, noticing with acceptance, acknowledging, not clinging, not shooting that extra arrow. Maybe a little bit different than your experience. So this is one feature of mindfulness that can really be helpful for us to avoid the way in which how we respond to a challenge, avoid that in a sense, the negativity, the judgmentalness, the reactivity that we can bring to our response to a challenge. Because of course we want to respond. So stress, sometimes we say, oh, I just want to get rid of my stress. If you got rid of all of your stress, the folks in our departments of psychology and biology would certainly tell you that if you got rid of all of your stress, that would actually not be a good thing, because we want a little stress, something that motivates us, when we have an illness, but one way of thinking about the immune response is it's actually a kind of stress response, right? So we're responding to a challenge, and that's what our bodies do naturally. It's in a sense what we want to do. We want to be able to activate ourselves and get ready for some kind of a challenge, maybe in athletics, maybe an exam. We want to have some response. But what we don't want to do is for that response to become too intense. If it becomes too intense, it really starts to, in most contexts, it starts to degrade our performance. So there are various ways that we can become stressed. And one of the ways that's really interesting actually has to do with just the way we think, the way we think about past and future. And one term for this is mental time travel. So, you can think about what you did this morning, or you can think about what you did yesterday or last week, or even last year. It's a whole year now since, the lockdowns started and the pandemic was officially declared. We can reflect over all that time. We can think about what the future is going to be like. So we can do this we can sit here in our chairs and do this kind of mental time travel just within our own minds. And we do this, it seems that humans can do this really a lot more effectively than many other kinds of creatures. That this capacity, of course, enables us to learn from the past and to also plan for the future and to do amazing things, all in collaboration. We can fly to the moon, we can make computers, we can create the amazing technology that enables us to all be in this cyberspace together now. So it's obviously a good thing, but there's a certain way in which humans are almost too good at this. We can actually think ourselves into stress. So let me illustrate this for you. Very simple way to illustrate this is to invite you to think about a food, if you don't mind. So I often use strawberries. I like strawberries. Of course, if you don't like strawberries, this exercise will work in some ways just as well. So here's an invitation. Just settle your mind for a moment. And now maybe eyes open or closed. Think about a beautiful bowl of strawberries, freshly washed. That amazing red color, that fresh scent of the strawberries, glistening in the morning sun. The morning sun is coming through the window and this beautiful bowl of strawberries is there. Maybe there's a little chocolate sauce nearby just for dipping. Can you see those strawberries so clearly? Just amazing. Or maybe even focus in on a particularly juicy, ripe strawberry. And what happens? Well, even though I've done this many times, even to myself, I can manage to make my mouth water, which is what I just managed to do just now, right? In a way, I can just say, I rest my case. Simply by thinking of a strawberry, I can have a physiological response as if I were actually, as if I had a bowl of strawberries in front of me. So that's the amazing power of the human mind, something that it seems like other animals, again, probably can't do quite as well as us. And this is why Robert Sapolsky, the scientist from Stanford University, wrote a book some years ago called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. Because unlike us, zebras can't project themselves into some kind of a future situation or dwell on some past traumatic situation in such a way as to create this almost like a reality in which we're living, as if we're in a sense kind of creating a little simulation of the situation itself. And with strawberries, maybe the only side effect is our mouths water and we get a little hungry. But if we're thinking about a stressful situation, let's say you're thinking about an exam you need to take tomorrow, that situation can actually start literally a stress response, what we call a fight or flight response, where the body is preparing to deal with some kind of a danger, actually. And that response, again, it's a healthy thing for us to respond to dangers, for us to respond to challenges. But if we're doing that all the time, where there's actually no actual challenge right in front of us right now, we're just thinking about some even hypothetical future challenge, that kind of chronic response leads to chronic stress. And chronic stress can be very difficult for us to manage both physiologically and psychologically. Chronic stress is associated with, a little bit too much inflammation in the body, for example. It's associated with chronic stress can be associated with anxiety and depression as well. So it's important for us not to fall into this place where we're constantly, in a sense, mental time traveling into a dangerous future, if you like, and fixating on that future, creating those simulations. Of course, we need to plan, but we need to develop a different relationship with the way in which we think about our lives, whether it's the past or the future. And this is something else that mindfulness can be very helpful for. One of the very simple styles of practice is something that we sometimes call decentering, or one aspect of mindfulness is something we sometimes call decentering, but another term is de-reification. So I'm going to explain what that means in a second. But first, I just want to give you an actual, an illustration of it, a practical, experiential illustration of this idea. So let's go back to the strawberries. All right, I'm going to ask you to, again, visualize those strawberries, really try to make them there, even try to get your mouth to water. And then I'm going to give you a certain instruction at a certain point. So be ready for that instruction. It's going to come in pretty quickly. So again, let's settle the mind and just visualize those beautiful strawberries. Freshly washed, maybe they're organic. Amazing scent, color, just waiting to be eaten. Maybe focus in on a particular strawberry, a really good one. See it very clearly. And now recognize that it's a thought. So that's an interesting moment, isn't it? You can be in the middle of some kind of a, very intense future simulation or thoughts about the past where it feels like you're almost really there. Something that we call also episodic memory, both prospective and retrospective episodic memory, where you're kind of like living a simulation. And when you recognize that it's a thought, what happens? When you see the strawberry as a thought, what happens? Well, in a way, it stops being a strawberry, right? For many people, it just goes poof. Since, why does it do that? Because when you recognize it's a thought, you're recognizing, well, in a sense, this is just more mind stuff, right? This is not a real strawberry. This is a thought of a strawberry. You can't eat the thought of a strawberry. You can't fill your belly with the thought of a strawberry. So when you recognize that it's just a thought, it's not a strawberry, you lose interest in it. So for many people, it just kind of goes poof. Or for some people, it kind of fades into the background. Or I've heard people describe like, oh, suddenly now it has a picture frame around it. Like it's just a picture. It's not a real strawberry. Right? So these are various kinds of ways in which this moment has effects on us. But the key aspect of this moment is that it allows us to de-reify the thought. So that term, the term reify is where we get this word. To reify something is to make it real, right? To make it real to yourself. So when we are thinking about something like strawberries or, an exam that you need to take or a difficult conversation that you're going to be having soon, when we have that kind of a thought and it seems very real, we're reifying it. But when we just recognize that the thought is a thought, we're de-reifying it. So that de-reification can be very helpful. It can give us a kind of distance on our thoughts and our capacity to sort of let go when we're too caught up in a useless train of thoughts, a train of thoughts that is not really helping us to deal with whatever challenges we're facing. So here's another opportunity for us to practice for a couple of minutes, maybe a little bit longer. In this practice, I'm just going to ask you to, again, do this very basic mindfulness practice. But now if a thought comes up, maybe you won't have a thought. Maybe sensation is what distracts you. Again, what we're going to do is just notice it, accept it, let go of the distraction, come back to the breath. But if it's a thought, maybe take that thought as an opportunity to really just see, okay, you're thinking about whatever, lunch or whatever you're thinking about. Just see it as a thought and see what happens when you do that. So let's try that for a couple of minutes here. Maybe not even 2 minutes. Again, finding our seat, that sense of stability. I find it helpful sometimes to think of Mother Earth as just holding us up. She holds us up no matter what we do. We don't have to make an effort. So just allow Mother Earth to hold you and settle down, drop down into the body, into the sensations of breathing. As distractions arise, just notice. Just notice and accept, let go, come back to the breath. If a thought arises, try seeing it as a thought. And then let go, come back to the breath. All right, I invite you to come back to our space here together. Now, there are many different styles of practice, actually, of mindfulness. There are many different opportunities, even on campus, for you to experiment with mindfulness practices and to learn about them. And I'll say something about them, about those opportunities soon. I also hope to leave us a little time for questions at the end. But I also want to give you just another technique that can be helpful as you are cultivating your mindfulness capacity and really enhancing this skill. That's a technique that can be really useful, even if you're someone who's done a lot of this kind of practice, but also maybe especially if you're a beginner in this practice, and it's called breath counting. It's a very simple technique. This aspect of mindfulness, this technique is really just kind of, in a sense, for getting us a little bit more centered. All of what we've talked about still applies. If we get distracted, we just notice, we accept and let go. If it's a thought, when we notice it as a thought, and that will help us to let go of it, and also even in a sense to accept. But sometimes the mind is really scattered and it's even doesn't feel like we can settle down at all. You're still practicing mindfulness. And in a certain way, you can't do this practice wrong. Just sitting and doing what we're doing, whatever's happening, you're doing it. That's it. So it's, again, that attitude, like what's the right way, what's the wrong way, probably good to set that aside in these contexts. But sometimes the mind really is scattered. What we call the monkey mind, jumping from branch to branch, jumping from thought to thought. And that monkey mind, we want to get the monkey to settle down a little bit. We can do breath counting. So a very simple way of doing this is we're going to observe the breath. But here the focus is just going to be as the breath comes in and then it goes out, we just count that as one. We don't need to breathe at any speed. We don't need to control the breath. We're just going to allow the body to naturally breathe. But then we're going to count. We go in and out, that's one. So one cycle, that's one. Another breath cycle, that's two. Then three. Then that's it. We can go up to three and then just go back to one again. When you've done this a bit more, you may want to try to count higher. Sometimes people even count all the way up to 21. That can be pretty challenging. So let's just start with three, up to three, and then come back and then start again at one. So let's just do that for a minute here. Settling. Finding that alert but relaxed position. Dropping down into the body. Notice the sensations of breathing and simply count the cycles. And again, if distraction happens, notice. If you lose count, that's fine. No need to shoot a second arrow. Just notice, accept, start again. All right, again, I invite you to come back to our space here. So, even if you didn't succeed once to get up to 3, no worries. The whole point is the journey in this case. It's definitely not the destination. It's really, these are just techniques, ways of allowing us to, in a sense, pay attention in a different way to our own experience, to perhaps be a little less caught in our reactivity, to have a broader and more expansive sense of the way in which we engage with our own thoughts and emotions. There's a lot more we could say about mindfulness, a lot more we could do, but we're running out of time. So I just wanted to say a couple of things about opportunities to engage with this kind of practice. One of these opportunities is actually through our own Center for Healthy Minds here on campus. We've developed a cell phone, a smartphone app called the Healthy Minds Program that's available on the Google Play Store and the App Store on your iPhone. And it's free of charge, something that includes these kinds of practices, but also a lot more. And there's many ways in which you can use the app, but you can also use it in a very basic way. So you may be hearing more about it, especially as we consider ways in which we can make it more available to our students. But again, you can just go ahead and download it if you like. You may find it to be quite helpful. There's also actually a very long-standing mindfulness program here at UW Health. So that program is based around the program called Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction. That's a more formal classroom kind of context, an 8-week class, but also very effective. There's been a lot of research to show that that's just like our Healthy Minds program, can be something that can be very helpful for dealing with stress. And the mindfulness-based stress reduction, which I'm also trained in, actually is a program that also gives you some techniques that you, of course, you can continue to use after that. So those are two opportunities. A third opportunity actually is a class that we call the Art and Science of Human Flourishing. And Scott, you want to come back online here for a second as we end with some questions and say, I just want to introduce that Scott Anderson, the moderator for this session, is also going to be running our class, the Art and Science of Human Flourishing, for the first time this summer. We've only been teaching it for freshmen the last since 2017. It's a class that we developed with colleagues at University of Virginia and Penn State University, and it's all around things like mindfulness, but again, a lot more than mindfulness. And Scott, so we're going to be teaching this summer, right? I think, when will that class be running this summer?
It's an 8-week session, John, and I believe we run through June 14th through August 6th.
All right, great. Well, so this is the first time that we're opening it up to students who are not just freshmen. So if you're an upperclassman and you're interested in taking that class, please, please, consider it. It might fill up pretty quick. I think we've only got 100 spots at this point, but I think you may find it to be helpful. I see some questions here. James was saying, can you say the name of the app again? So this is called the Healthy Minds app. And if you have any doubt, you can also just go to the Center for Healthy Minds website, and you'll be able to find it there as well. What other questions do we have here, Scott?
Well, we had a question that came in about cognitive behavioral therapy and the observation that there's a lot of overlap of what we did in mindfulness, and interested in elaborating on that.
Yes, so actually part of, there is actually a form of mindfulness-based therapy that's called mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, which is, I believe, also taught here through the Department of Psychiatry. And mindfulness-based cognitive therapy actually combines some features of cognitive behavioral therapy with mindfulness. And it's also shown to be pretty effective for dealing with certain types of challenges. And yet there actually seems to be a real overlap. When, of course, one of the people who you could say in the spiritual world who's attuned to what mindfulness is the Dalai Lama. And when he connected with Scott Beck some years ago, I think they immediately saw, wow, there's a huge amount of overlap here. So yes, in fact, there is some really interesting overlap that, independently cultures can come to some similar conclusions around the world. I would encourage you, if you're interested in cognitive behavior therapy, to maybe check out mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, but also that kind of cognitive therapeutic aspect of CBT is a big part of the Healthy Minds app. So you can also find that in our Healthy Minds program. It's not just about meditation, it's also about sort of learning about our habits of mind, learning about how we can get stuck in certain kinds of habits of mind, and so on. Another one, Scott?
Yeah, we have so many great questions. One came in, any advice on how to de-reify painful memories? Finding it difficult, well, these were real events.
Yes, so that's a really good one, Scott. And this is, so one of the real challenges and invitations in mindfulness is actually to deal with pain, both psychological and physical pain. And one way of thinking about this is that when we're really averse to pain, we don't want it, we want to push it away. It's really hard for us to look at it clearly. And in some sense, we're already sort of shooting second arrows because we're so afraid of that pain. So one approach here, one needs to be gentle and clear about it, not push too hard, but is to actually, in a sense, let go of what you think the pain is, let go of your interpretation of the pain, and really just try to observe what that is. What does this feel like? What, in a sense, is it made out of? And especially with painful memories, they can really have an impact on us, but also they are only thoughts. They are only memories. And sometimes really exploring and seeing them more clearly allows us to become a little bit less enthralled by them, a little less afraid of them in a sense. But this is a challenge, no question. I'm certainly no expert, but hopefully that approach may be helpful.
Another question, why do we count up to 3 and not continue counting?
You can count as high as you want. There's 3 is something that we've experimented with in the Healthy Minds program because, in some ways, less is more when you're starting out here. Make it simple, make it easy. Some Buddhist traditions talk about, in the Buddhist context, they talk about counting up to 7 or 21. Those are just numbers that, for whatever reason, the Buddhist traditions who do mindfulness have spoken about. There are breathing practices that are really like mindfulness practices also in Christian contemplation. For example, the Jesus prayer in Orthodox Christianity actually has a kind of element of this, and that is just endless. That just keeps going. So, there's really no limit, but part of it is not to get caught up in how much, what you don't want to do is like say, oh, I got up to 723 breaths. It's not a competition here. We're not trying to win a race. So that is, you want to avoid that attitude.
Great. Do we have time for one more question?
Maybe a quick one.
Alrighty. Sometimes thoughts come up that are really faint, almost unnoticeable. Is it recommended to take time to really notice that thought, see it more clearly, or is it better to stop that thought and stop it from materializing?
That's a really great question, a really interesting question that I'm not going to be able to answer in a short period of time. But what I would recommend is having this attitude: we're not trying to stop thoughts. There's no need to stop them. We do talk about dereifying them, but even then they may not stop. We're just going to maybe allow us to have a different relationship to them where they don't seem so real to us, so to speak. So we're so caught in that particular story. So that's one aspect here is whatever thought is coming up, don't, in a sense, have a sense that you got to stop it. That's not the attitude we want to have here. But having said that, this is a great question because it really is. And sometimes, maybe we really do want to inquire into a thought, see where it's coming from. And sometimes we just want to let a thought go. So it's probably has a lot to do with what that thought's about, what the context is. Can't answer all that in this short period of time. And I think, Scott, probably we better wrap it up here. Just want to thank everyone for all of the organizers of this event. I know there've been a lot of people involved, many students, some of our staff, like Susan Huber-Miller at the Center for Healthy Minds. Just want to thank everyone for that. Really fantastic. Spend the day, in enjoyment, allowing your sort of natural resources for mental health to be restored. And looking forward to seeing some of you maybe in some future time at an event at the Center for Healthy Minds or in the Art and Science of Human Flourishing class or whatever it might be. Take care, everybody.
Thank you so much, John, and thank you all for attending. Please visit wellbeingsummit.wisc.edu for other events throughout the day. And you can use the same Zoom link for all the events. Coming up shortly at 11 a.m., Dr. Tony Chambers of the Center for Healthy Minds will be presenting a session, Flourishing in Contentious Times. Beyond the summit, I invite you to put your mental health plan into practice next week. And as part of the grassroots campaign to promote self-care, community well-being among all of our students, faculty, and staff. And we're calling this collective effort, Take Care UW. You can find related activities and recorded sessions from the Mental Health and Wellbeing Summit on the event website. And join the conversation on social media using the hashtag TakeCareUW.
All right. Take care, UW. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.